It was a quiet morning when the iron gates of the penitentiary clanged shut behind him and Elijah Grant stepped into the world he had almost forgotten. He hadn't felt the warmth of the sun on his face in 17 years, yet the brightness seemed to burn his eyes. His clothes hung loosely, mismatched shoes barely holding together. He had no family waiting, no welcoming arms, just a small duffel bag that contained the fragments of a life he once knew. The world, once familiar, now felt distant and foreign, and in his chest, the name Maya was the only thing that hadn't changed. Elijah Grant was a man defined by silence. He had spent nearly 2 decades behind bars, a sentence that had aged him beyond his years. The walls of the prison had stripped him of his youth, leaving him with only memories of the life he had lost. The streets he once knew had moved on without him, and now, as he stepped out of those iron gates, he felt like a ghost in his own city. Yet, it wasn't just the years that weighed on him, it was the promise he had made to protect his family, to safeguard a loyalty that now seemed like a distant dream. He walked into a world that no longer remembered the man he used to be, but every step he took carried the heavy truth: his past would always follow him, no matter how far he ran. Elijah's past was shaped by 2 people: Maya, the woman who had once been his world, and Marcus, his childhood friend who had become something far more dangerous. Maya had been the steady flame in his life, the one person who had never wavered even as he disappeared into the dark world of crime. They had dreams, big ones. They were supposed to build a future together, and in his mind, he had promised to protect her at any cost. Marcus, on the other hand, was the embodiment of ambition and charm. He could talk his way out of anything, and his smooth-talking ways made him popular in their neighborhood. But as time went on, Marcus' hunger for power took a darker turn, and his friendship with Elijah became more strained, more complex. When Maya entered the picture, their bond was tested in ways Elijah never anticipated. The 3 of them formed a tight unit, but beneath the surface, something was about to crack, and it wasn't long before Elijah found himself at the crossroads of loyalty and betrayal. Elijah and Marcus had been inseparable since childhood, their bond forged in the tough streets of East New Orleans. They were more than friends. They were brothers, sharing everything from the same small apartment to the same dreams of making it out. Marcus was the charismatic one, always the life of the party, while Elijah was the quiet force, focused and dependable. Together, they were unstoppable, until the day Maya walked into their lives. Maya was different from anyone they had known. She wasn't looking for shortcuts. She wanted something real. When she and Elijah first met, there was an instant connection, something unspoken but undeniable. She saw potential in him, a future they could build together. But to Marcus, Maya was more than just Elijah's girlfriend. She was a symbol of everything he couldn't have. Slowly, his admiration for Elijah turned into something darker, a jealousy that began to seep into their friendship. As the years passed, Marcus's ambitions grew. He started making money, and not through honest means. He would boast about his deals, his connections, and the world he was building, but his answers never quite added up. Elijah, who had always trusted Marcus, started to notice the cracks in their friendship, small things at first. Marcus's late-night calls, his refusal to explain where the money came from, and his coldness whenever Maya was around. But Elijah chose to ignore the signs. He wanted to believe that Marcus was just caught up in the hustle, that everything would eventually settle. But it didn't. Maya, too, was changing. She was no longer the bright, optimistic woman he had fallen in love with. The pressure of their situation, coupled with Marcus's increasing presence in their lives, was taking its toll. What once seemed like a perfect triangle, Elijah, Maya, and Marcus, was starting to crack under the weight of secrets, lies, and unspoken resentments. The tipping point came on a rainy night, the kind of night where everything felt like it was about to drown in the weight of its own secrets. Elijah had been working long hours, trying to keep his head down and make an honest living, but the world around him was spinning faster than he could keep up. That night, Marcus called him with a deal, a quick job, a one-time favor. No big deal, just a little something to get ahead, just like before. Elijah hesitated, but the pressure was undeniable. Maya had been distant, the bills were piling up, and the promise of something easy was too tempting. He trusted Marcus. He had to. Marcus had always been the one with the answers, the one who made things happen. So, against his better judgment, Elijah agreed to help one last time. But this time, things didn't go as planned. The cops had been watching, and before Elijah knew it, the sirens were blaring and his life was crumbling. Arrested and facing serious charges, Elijah was offered a deal by the detectives: give up Marcus, name him as the mastermind, and he would walk away with a lighter sentence. Elijah stood at a crossroads. His entire future was on the line, but his loyalty to Marcus, his loyalty to the bond they had shared, was unshakable. He couldn't betray him, not even for freedom. The words came out of his mouth before he could fully process them. "We can't both go down." And just like that, Elijah made the ultimate sacrifice. He chose to protect Marcus, knowing it would cost him his freedom. It wasn't just a decision, it was a declaration of loyalty. One that would bind him to his fate for the next 2 decades. 2 weeks after his release, Elijah returned to the streets he once called home. But the world he knew had long since changed. He was no longer the young man with hope in his eyes. Now, the weight of his past decisions clung to him like a second skin. But nothing could have prepared him for what awaited him when he stepped into the quiet Baton Rouge neighborhood that night. It was a house that once felt like home, a place filled with laughter, love, and memories shared between the 3 of them. But when Elijah knocked on the door, what he heard next wasn't the welcoming sound of laughter. It was a scream, followed by the deafening sound of gunfire. The echoes of those shots seemed to hang in the air, frozen in time. When the police arrived, they found the house undisturbed on the outside, but inside, the scene was chilling. Marcus and Maya were lying on the floor, their bodies cold and lifeless, each with a single bullet wound to the head. No signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, just death, swift and final. And the most haunting part? The absence of any forced entry, no signs of an outsider. Whoever had done this knew them, knew exactly how to get in. Elijah's name was quickly brought up in the investigation. The detectives found themselves staring at the same question. Could it be him? Was this the tragic outcome of a betrayal so deep it had to end in violence? Or was it something even darker, a crime of passion, a final act of vengeance for a love once shared, now destroyed by years of lies? What was clear, however, was that Elijah's release, his return to this place, had set in motion a tragic end. The past had caught up to them all, and now nothing would ever be the same. The investigation began like any other, with standard procedures and typical questions. But as the hours passed and the pieces of the puzzle slowly began to fall into place, the detectives realized they were dealing with something much more complex than a typical double murder. At first, it seemed straightforward. 2 victims, both shot execution style in the comfort of their own home. The absence of forced entry suggested it was someone they knew. But the deeper the detectives dug, the more unsettling the picture became. The neighbors described Elijah as a man who had just been released from prison, but none could explain why he would return to the very place that had once been his home, only to commit such a brutal act. Then came the first breakthrough, a connection to Marcus. Elijah and Marcus's bond had been a strong one, almost unbreakable. But what had once been a friendship founded on loyalty now seemed tainted by something more sinister. The detectives unearthed a hidden layer of betrayal that went back years, to the very moment when Elijah had been arrested and made the decision to protect Marcus. But there was more. The evidence didn't just point to a tragic end to a friendship, it hinted at something much darker: revenge. The detectives found old letters that Elijah had written from prison, letters to Marcus and Maya, his pleas for forgiveness, and a growing sense of abandonment that had begun to surface in the months before the murders. Marcus and Maya's distance had not been just physical, it was emotional. The silence had been growing, and the visits from Marcus, once frequent, had become fewer and fewer. And then something else surfaced, a witness, a neighbor who had heard something more than just gunshots that night. She recalled hearing a conversation right before the crime, one that sounded like a final argument, a betrayal of sorts. With every new clue, the detectives began to piece together a chilling story. This wasn't just a murder, it was the tragic culmination of years of loyalty, love, and broken trust. But the most chilling part? The deeper they dug, the more it seemed like Elijah had been set up to fall into the very web of betrayal he had tried so hard to avoid. The deeper the detectives dug, the more they uncovered, but it wasn't until they began tracing the memories locked away in Elijah's mind that the true story began to emerge. Slowly, the pieces of the past fell into place, revealing a tale of sacrifice, loyalty, and betrayal. In one flashback, Elijah is a young man again, sitting on the hood of his old car with Maya beside him. The 2 of them watch the sunset, dreams of a future they would build together flickering in their eyes. She tells him about nursing school, about how she wants to make something of herself. Elijah promises her that he'll work hard, do whatever it takes to make sure she gets there. She smiles at him, her hand resting on his, and for a moment, everything feels perfect. But as time passed, that perfect world began to shift. Another flashback shows Elijah walking into his apartment to find Marcus pacing, talking fast, hands flying as he describes another get-rich-quick scheme. "Just one more time, man. It's easy," Marcus promises. Elijah hesitates, the tension between loyalty and caution pulling at him. His phone buzzes. Maya's message, "We need to talk." But before he can respond, Marcus is already pulling him back into the hustle, convincing him it's just a temporary fix. Then, another flashback. This time, Elijah stands in a courtroom, eyes locked on the floor as the judge pronounces his sentence. 20 years. Maya's face in the back row, tears streaking down her cheeks, her hand pressed to her heart, and beside her, Marcus, stoic, silent. The moment the gavel falls, Marcus looks at Elijah, a fleeting glance, but Elijah catches it. It's something he didn't notice at the time, but now, with the weight of everything behind him, it stings. Marcus's look wasn't one of sympathy, it was one of relief. Years pass in prison, and another flashback shows Elijah, sitting alone in his cell, reading Maya's letters. Her handwriting has changed. The words feel distant. "I'm trying, Elijah. I'm doing my best." The letters stop coming as frequently, then stop altogether. And the visits, once a lifeline, are now just a shadow of what they used to be. Marcus shows up, but he talks more than he listens. He reassures Elijah that everything is fine, that Maya is just stressed. But Elijah doesn't believe him anymore. He can see the cracks, the lies, the distance. The final flashback is the most painful. Elijah recalls a visit from Marcus, just days before the murder. He can still hear Marcus's voice. "She's good, bro. You don't have to worry." But the words hit differently now. The unease, the doubt, the realization that what he'd been holding on to all these years was nothing more than a lie, slowly eats at him. As Marcus walks out of the prison yard, he says, "We're all in this together, Elijah. Always." But Elijah is alone now, in his cell, staring at the walls, piecing together the truth. His loyalty had kept him locked in a cage for years, protecting the very man who had slowly, steadily stolen everything from him. The woman he loved, the life he dreamed of, and the future he had promised to fight for. And now, with the sound of the gunshots still echoing in his mind, Elijah knows. Everything he sacrificed, all the love and devotion, had been wasted. Because in the end, loyalty wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to keep the ones he loved from walking away. The investigation had gone cold. Until one fateful morning when Elijah walked into the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's office, his steps deliberate, his face expressionless. The deputies were caught off guard. There had been no press conference, no signs that this was coming. Elijah hadn't been brought in for questioning. He had come on his own. He walked to the front desk, his hands trembling slightly as he placed his ID on the counter. "I need to confess," he said, his voice steady, but the words hung in the air like a confession that had been years in the making. The officer behind the desk looked up, the usual calm replaced with confusion. "Confess to what, Elijah?" Elijah didn't hesitate. "I killed them, Marcus and Maya. It was me." For a moment, the room was still, the weight of his words sinking in. Elijah had been out of prison for barely 2 weeks, and now he was walking in, confessing to the murder of the people he had once loved. The officers didn't ask why. They didn't need to, they already knew. The whole community knew. Elijah had been the first suspect the moment the crime scene was discovered. But no one expected him to step forward. No one expected him to break the silence. As Elijah was led away, cuffed once again, the truth became undeniable. The man who had spent 20 years in prison, protecting the very people who betrayed him, had now come full circle. The betrayal had cut so deeply, so fiercely, that in the end, the only way for him to find peace was to take the lives of those he once sacrificed everything for. The detectives stood in silence, their eyes locked on Elijah's retreating figure. They had thought they understood the motive, that it was a crime of passion, an act of betrayal. But now they knew it wasn't just about love gone wrong. It was about a man who had been pushed to the edge for far too long, a man who could no longer bear the weight of his own silence. And with that final, devastating revelation, everything changed. The story, once filled with questions, now had its answer. Elijah Grant had killed the people he loved. But what had driven him to this point? Was it betrayal? Was it anger? Or was it simply the broken heart of a man who had given everything, only to find that nothing, no loyalty, no love could ever be enough? Elijah's confession sent ripples through the community, but it was his life in the aftermath that would haunt him forever. He was sentenced to life without parole, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of the choices he made. The courtroom, which had been full of tension and whispers, now felt empty. There were no cheers, no uproar, just silence. Silence for the lives lost, for the dreams shattered, for the love that had been drowned in betrayal. But the true weight of his actions came not in the punishment he faced, but in the isolation he would now endure. As the prison doors closed behind him once again, this time there was no one to hold him. No letters from Maya, no visits from Marcus, no promises of a future. The world he had fought for was gone, and all that remained was the quiet, endless hum of the prison walls. Elijah had traded one form of captivity for another. He was no longer a man torn between loyalty and betrayal, but a man left to wrestle with the consequences of his own decisions. In the months that followed, the memory of Maya's face haunted him. Her voice, once filled with hope and love, now echoed in the silence of his cell. He would replay their memories over and over, trying to find where things had gone wrong. But each time, the images blurred. The pain of betrayal, the betrayal he had never allowed himself to fully understand, was now the only thing he had left. Marcus, too, faced his own aftermath. The betrayal, though not as publicly declared, lingered in the quiet streets of Baton Rouge. He couldn't escape the guilt, the whispered questions about his role in the destruction of a man who had once called him brother. In the absence of Elijah's presence, Marcus now had everything he had once wanted: Maya, the life, the family, but it felt empty. The life he had built was tainted by the realization that it had come at the cost of someone who had loved him without question. And Maya, the one caught in the center of it all, was left broken. The love of her life was gone, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional and psychological sense as well. The man she had loved had vanished behind bars, and the man who had replaced him, the one who had once been her closest friend, was now the man who had taken everything from her. She lived with the grief of losing both men in one fell swoop, her husband to prison, her first love to the depths of betrayal. As the years went on, Elijah's name became a quiet whisper. Some spoke of him as a murderer, a man who couldn't be forgiven. Others remembered the man he once was, the loyal friend, the loving partner. But no matter the perspective, one truth remained: the man who had once been full of hope, full of love, was now just a ghost of the past. His life, once promising, now sat in the prison cell like a shadow, a reminder that sometimes, no matter how much you give, it's never enough. As Elijah sits alone in his cell with nothing but the silence to keep him company, the questions he once asked others now echo within him. Was loyalty truly worth it? Could the sacrifice he made ever justify the pain it caused? And, in the end, was love enough to save him, or did it only bind him tighter to a fate he could never escape? In the world outside those walls, people often speak of loyalty, of standing by the ones you love through thick and thin. But how far is too far? How much should you give before you lose yourself entirely? Can there be justice in the sacrifice of one life for another? Or does the act of betrayal, even if it's rooted in love, always leave a scar? Elijah believed that love was a bond stronger than time, stronger than circumstance. But what happens when the very people you protect turn away from you? What happens when the loyalty you cling to becomes the very thing that destroys you? If you were in Elijah's shoes, could you have walked away? Would you have made the same choices, knowing the cost? Or, like him, would you have stayed, holding on to a love that had already slipped through your fingers, believing that sacrifice was the only way to preserve what little was left? Sometimes we tell ourselves that love, loyalty, and sacrifice are what define us. But in the face of betrayal, the question remains: is it worth it? Or does it all just fade into the silence of our actions, leaving nothing but the echoes of what we've lost? If you were moved by this story and the complex emotions behind it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more untold true crime stories that challenge what we think we know about loyalty, love, and betrayal. Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you have handled Elijah's situation? We love hearing from you. Stay tuned for more compelling narratives that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. And remember, some truths are harder to face than others, but they're the ones that stick with us long after the story ends.